We're already 3 minutes in. It's only an hour meeting. So unless you want me to wait for someone that you know is coming in, if that's so, please say so. Otherwise, I will just start with a little introduction about the Cambridge Society of Paris, and then we can get started with more of a discussion. And obviously presentation from Chris first, and then from Marcella. By presentation, I mean mostly the storytelling around the key activities we are discussing around tonight, which is the Carbon 13 story valley. So Cambridge Society of Paris, it's one of the alumni society that is probably the largest in Europe after the one in the UK. Tony and I, we are member of the committee for that organization. And so we have organized, we have a variety of events organized throughout the year for our members. During the COVID era, we adapted and did a lot of our meetings online, which also created an opportunity for me to do what I wanted to do for a while, which is to open and create a series of events focused on sustainability and entrepreneurship. And by opportunity, I mean that because it was a Zoom event, we managed to invite people from all over the place, not just people living in Paris or in France, which is really what you see around here tonight. Also, people are not just based in Paris, clearly. And so without further ado, I want to introduce you to Chris Coleridge. So Chris joined the Cambridge Church Business School as a senior faculty specialized in strategy and entrepreneurship in 2016. He's also co-founded Carbon 13, which is the venture builder designed to tackle climate change. He co-founded that organization in 2019. And it's a very ambitious, but very well needed endeavor. With the target to create companies from each of the cohorts selected. Each of the company they invest in will have the potential to reduce carbon emission in the given area of application by at least 10 million tons. So it's very ambitious, and it's a kind of endeavor that really the climate emergency requires. So we'll have Chris explain a little bit the journey, how he led to that conclusion that this was needed, where the Carbon 13 venture is at, maybe some lesson learned on how easy it is to create such an ambitious venture on his side. But before that, I will just introduce also briefly Marcella Flores. So Marcella got a master's degree in sustainability and leadership from Cambridge Business School 2021. And Marcella, you also joined Carbon 13, the very first cohort in March this year, in March this year. And you are now part of one of the ventures that have received the initial 100,000 funding from Carbon 13. On my end, just a brief introduction. I would just say that I'm currently part of the second cohort of Carbon 13, and we can also have Q&As on those stage. So Chris, if you want to tell us a little bit the story of Carbon 13, I know you have said it many times, but there are people here that would love to know how you came to this decision of creating such an ambitious venture, and why entrepreneurship in particular you feel is the solution to the climate crisis.
A part of the solution. Thank you, Nicholas. A very nice introduction, and I'm really delighted that Marcella, you were able to join this evening, because Carbon 13 is all about the ventures that we're getting going. It's not about me. It's about the ventures. So let's see if I can do the 10-minute version or the 5-minute version. I was an entrepreneur as a young man in my 20s and early 30s. It went okay. Ups and downs. I sold a big chunk of the business in 2001 and went off to do an MBA, not at Cambridge, unfortunately, and fell in love with business school. Both my parents were academics, so I think I felt at home in an academic coming back to an academic institution. The part of the business that I didn't sell, I had to close in 2005, and I decided to pursue the academic route properly and went off to the London School of Economics to do a master's degree in social psychology. And the plan at the time was then to go to Cambridge. By then I was living in Cambridge to do a PhD, but I found the perfect supervisor at the LSE, so I stayed at the LSE and did my PhD in, broadly speaking, business model innovation. Was the sort of overarching topic, but with a sociological lens based on social networks and sort of meso level kind of networking theory, I guess would be a way of expressing it. At the outset of my PhD, I believed I was going to be a research intensive guy and publish lots of papers. By the end of the 5 years, I felt less enthusiastic about this path. So my teaching career has been as a teaching intensive faculty with little research activity. First at University College London, where I taught strategy and entrepreneurship in the School of Management and ran the master's degree in technology entrepreneurship, and eventually 5 years ago, as Nicolas said, in the business school in Cambridge, which was a very carbon positive move. I can cycle to work now instead of driving to the train station. So that's good. I suppose one of the reasons that I left the world of business for academia was because I felt it was a family-friendly thing to do. I've got two not so young now, two sons. My sons now are 19 and 16, so life has moved on in various ways. I joined the faculty in Cambridge to set up a master's degree in entrepreneurship, as I had run at UCL. But 2 years into that, I mean, I set that up and it's going very well within the business school, but 2 years in I realized that I was not going to have the kind of impact in my career just running master's degrees. It's a pleasant thing to do, but it's a sort of soft birth. So I went to our dean, Professor Christoph Lock, in the business school, and asked for permission to run a venture builder on the side of the day job, which was happily forthcoming, and set off on the journey to set up Carbon 13. I'd been watching the startup accelerator space for many years, obviously with a professional interest, and I had a number of conclusions that I wanted to put into practice. One was that most accelerators are very bad because they're basically shop windows for a single investor and their sort of coterie of colleagues, and so the role of an accelerator properly should be to be a sort of honest broker between the entrepreneur and the investor, but most accelerators are not that honest broker. They're simply a sort of front for investors. So that was one conclusion. A second conclusion was that I very much admired a model that had arisen in recent years, where rather than start with a pre-existing team and try to accelerate their work, you start with founders who have never met each other, stir them together in a pot and see what teams they create, partly of course based on the ideas they come in with, as was the case in Marcella's case, and support, coach, guide these entrepreneurs to do something really extraordinary. Now, at the same time, I became convinced that I was going to spend the rest of my career on climate change. It sounds very banal if I put it this way, but it was Greta. I had spent the previous years, up to about 2018, saying to my kids, I think climate change will be fine. There's lots of clever people. We're quite an innovative species. We'll figure a way to get through it. But the Greta phenomenon caused me to read a little more deeply and talk to people who I hadn't maybe engaged with so deeply before. And I realized that it's as we all know now, it's an existential problem. It's one where we have little time yet left. It's quite conceivable that we're too late, and then as a species we're done because of climate change. of course, I've been saying in my lecture theaters for many years, entrepreneurship is the route through which humanity tackles the biggest problems that it has, or let's be more modest and say the problems that corporates are not willing to tackle. So climate change innovation falls squarely into the category of innovation problems that corporates are not willing to tackle. Corporates, if we look at the history of business, corporates are very poor at business model innovation. That's what I studied in my PhD. They're very poor at cross-disciplinary innovation. The mindset in a corporate tends to get stuck around the decade that they became prominent, and it never really moves on much. Corporates are unwilling to innovate before the ink is dry on the new regulations. They want to see typically they want to slow down new regulations, and any positive innovation case is only going to come after the new regulations are in place, whereas entrepreneurs are willing to get started quickly. And then not all, but much of the type of innovation that changes behavior comes from entrepreneurs who, with their sort of agility and creativity and all these things that we know about, are willing to get in the cracks and say, okay, what are the new arrangements that actually consumers or businesses are willing to engage with? So I hope my story is making sense. These two streams crossed, right? The idea that you would bring talented people who wanted to make a difference to climate change together and show them the way that entrepreneurship could potentially make that difference. I don't claim, of course, for a moment that the scale of change that is needed can only be achieved through entrepreneurship. Governments will have to play their part for sure. But it's an existing social institution. I have a lot of sympathy with Extinction Rebellion, but they start from the premise that first we need to break down capitalism and break down many existing social institutions and then rebuild them, and then we can solve the problem. I don't think it's realistic. Whereas entrepreneurship is an existing tool that humanity has created to solve a certain class of problems that we have to hand right now, that has existing arrangements of investment and so on, and so we can take advantage of that. That was the premise. The call to talent, we try to bring together people who have technical ideas and are technically skilled, and people who are commercial in their background. But the call to all of them is, come and work on a venture that has the potential to take 10 million tons CO2 equivalent emissions out of the emissions base. Now, when we started saying this in spring 2019, this was a really ambitious target, 10 million tons, and it is ambitious. The typical carbon footprint of a Briton is about 6.5 tons, maybe, depends on how you look at it. And so to reduce the carbon footprint by 10 million tons, you might need a business where the innovation concerned would reduce the emissions of the customer by 15%, which is a lot, and have 10 million customers, which is a lot, right? So to aim for 10 million tons is already ambitious. Of course, now the Americans are very much in the act and saying, yes, climate change targeted entrepreneurial innovation is really needed. And being Americans, they talk about 500 million tons, a billion tons, which is great because that's a scale that we need. On the other hand, 10 million tons is already ambitious. So, the role of that call on 10 million tons is in the work that we do is that, in a normal startup accelerator or in a sort of purely commercial startup accelerator, it's they talk about unicorns, right? And if you haven't heard the term, a unicorn is $1 billion valuation business. And so when we talk about 10 million tons, it's about getting the entrepreneurs to lift up their eyes, see a very ambitious target and go for it, rather than to say, well, I'm going to feel better about my climate anxiety if I set something up that has a local impact, a local scale, and is doing something very worthy, that they should, given the timescales and the urgency of the challenge, that they should be aiming internationally, they should be aiming for super high impact approaches from the start. Now, bearing in mind what I mentioned about the difficulty of doing valuable support for entrepreneurs, value-adding support for entrepreneurs, if you just have one investor in the mix, we didn't go down the road of saying, okay, who's our billionaire? Who's going to bankroll this? We said, okay, we want to be brokers, and being brokers means that your support is coming from lots of different directions, so that you're not beholden to any one stakeholder, and you can genuinely play the role of being honest brokers. So that decision set us on the road of a roughly 15-month journey. I spent a year going up and down. I had a total of about 200 meetings with different corporates and different people who might introduce me to corporates to try to get corporate sponsorship, right? Over the course of about 15 months, it was about 200 meetings. At the end of that time, I added up I sorted out all my train tickets and added them up into an expenses claim. And it was really striking to me how much time I'd spent on the road, so to speak. Eventually, we got some corporate sponsors to jump and support our work, so that we wouldn't be reliant on investors for our sort of running costs. Now, the first of these was BP Ventures, and this was we were very nervous, right? Because we thought, well, maybe taking money from BP will kill our whole enterprise from the start, and send the message that we're not really serious about climate change, that we're just a kind of a greenwashing project and a tool of the corporates. We, the founding team, and I haven't said much about my co-founders, but I will loop back to it, we're sure in our hearts that our hearts were pure, and that we had the correct intentions. But what's intentions next to action? Taking money from BP was it was a scary thing. But we were delighted. We then managed to get some further corporate sponsorship from ARM, from DLA Piper, the law firm, from EY, the professional services firm, and from Volkswagen. Of course, Volkswagen money is also a bit, that's guilt money. But we got a spread, and we were delighted to see that this decision didn't seem to really stop us from. I mean, certainly BP has never asked us to touch our mission or change our approach. They have a rationale for being engaged with us, which is that they claim that they want to invest in low carbon economy startups. I mean, I take them at their word, right? But I find it irrelevant whether they mean it or not. But they've never asked us to change what we're doing, so that meets our test. So then we began trying to assemble a cohort of talented people together, and also at the same time raising an investment fund which makes investments as part of our model, which I'll explain in a minute, into the ventures, so into Marcelo's venture, for example, and maybe into Nicolas's venture if he develops a good one, as part of our second cohort. And we are so we managed, despite the pandemic, we managed to put together a group of 59 founders together who started up with us on the 16th of March. Of course, at the time, the UK was still in total lockdown, so it was all virtual. These 59 founders, by the 1st of May, had gathered together in 23 teams. And those 23 teams then pitched for investment in the middle of July. And we were happy to make 8 investments from those, where we felt that they had a commercial, scalable model that could, over a 8 to 10 year period, grow to something that could potentially take 10 million tons CO2 equivalent emissions or more out of the emission space. We're totally sector agnostic. We work across all, most of human activity has a carbon implication, so we work across all sectors of the economy. We're very happy with the ventures that we invested in, and it's a great start. But as I said to the new cohort that started 2 weeks ago, we don't want to get stuck in a low Earth orbit, and that's not meaning any offense to the cohort 1 ventures, but we want things that we want to continue to push the boundaries in terms of achieving breakthroughs, right? And having the innovations that we're trying to foster into the world be real game changers. And I hope we have a few game changers in cohort 1, but we don't want to let up on, always the danger with any innovation effort is that you are satisfied with the early efforts and you don't make the proper steps to try to keep pushing on and raising your level of ambition. Something that's really come into play in, okay, I should explain the model a little bit. So we've made those investments, and those 8 ventures are now in the second half of our program, which is like a classic startup accelerator, where we're introducing them to investors, helping them with their pitch, helping them focus their efforts in with the correct priorities, and getting them ready to potentially raise a bunch more money before Christmas, so that they can take their projects on to the next stage. And that's sort of the function of the project. Now that cohort 2 is in place, an aspect that we've had in view from the start is there, which is that we are, and I will shut up in a minute because I'm sure this should develop into a conversation rather than a lecture. But we had in mind from the start that we wanted to be a community, right? If we look at the history of innovation, something that I've read into quite a lot, great innovations come from communities, right? Great innovations come from that clash of mindsets. On a very simple level, as I traveled around talking to different groups about this, you talk to a lot of what I would call social impact entrepreneurs who believe that the problem is fundamentally a behavior change problem. And I talk to a lot of engineers who believe that the problem is fundamentally an engineering problem. And at the minimum, those two groups need to talk. Right? Engineers tend to know engineers, social impact entrepreneurs tend to know other sort of, let's say, social science, humanities, inflected type of people. It's the two cultures in action. The two cultures need to come together and talk. But on a deeper level, we model ourselves, and it may sound immodest, but we model ourselves on the coffee houses of 17th century London, and we want to bring into effect the same clash of new thinking and old thinking, new money and old money, people coming back from far-flung parts of the world. Marcel is working in Guatemala, for example, with people working in stagnant parts of the world, like the UK, and try to have that clash of sensibility, clash of mindset, clash of background, clash of perspective, be generative of real breakthroughs and changes. Christiana Figueres, who you may recognize the name as the person who ran the UN Directorate on Climate Change when the Paris Accords were arrived at, has said something which has really stuck with me, which is that we don't have to come up with the new arrangements that we will live under post-climate crisis. We don't have to come up with them in advance. We have to arrive at them, right? And once we have arrived at them, then we will know what they are, right? And that's sort of fundamental to our idea that, we're using this institution of entrepreneurship because it is a change vector, right? And the notion is to get that change vector working for climate change, and if we are expansive enough in our logic and don't sort of narrow down to some boring, predictable stream of innovations, then potentially we may be part of a seedbed that could really move the needle and make a substantial enough difference to really help with the problem. I should say I have two co-founders in the journey. Dr. Nikki D, who's come from the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, and is a sustainability professional, and also one who's been involved in using entrepreneurship for impact for many years. And Michael Langguth, who actually is a former student of mine at University College London, who then went on to be a much more successful entrepreneur than I ever was. And is the third member of our team. There was a fourth member of our team at one time, Frank Knowles, who was a former student of mine in Judge Business School, but that gives a misleading impression because he was the same age as me. Unfortunately, Frank, who was had done natural sciences at Christ's some years ago, passed away on the 11th of April of a massive heart attack while he was out walking with his wife. So this was a huge blow to us, as you can imagine. He was our chief financial person, and he's someone that we remember in a variety of ways. But one is that at the final sort of graduation, at the end of each cohort, we give the Frank Knowles Prize to the venture team that has been the most supportive to the fellow ventures, right? In the so it's not an individualistic sport, entrepreneurship. You have to work as a team. You have to work as a team, and you have to embed that team in a community that's going to make you rise. And so that's what we're trying to remember through this prize in Frank's name. So that's the end of my little narrative. Thank you very much for inviting me to share it, Nicholas. But I want to say concise things from now on, and let others have the floor.
Thank you very much, based on that. I'm sure everybody appreciated the full background you provided. Conscious that there would be lots of interested questions, I'm sure, following up. But Marcela, I want to give you the opportunity also to share your side of the story in terms of cohort 1 founder. Maybe through 3 simple questions. In simple question, the answer may be more complex, but if you could express the reason why you initially applied for Carbon 13. Maybe a second question would be, how did you come up and how the team formed? What was the dynamic? How easy or hard was it? And maybe to end, a little update on what's going on right now in the phase mentioned as phase 3 in the program, where I guess you're actively engaging with investors.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. And yeah, moving the conversation from Chris is a big task. There lots of food for thought there. Just wanted to mention about the 10 million tons versus half a gigaton. I think it is 10 million tons per year for us, but for an American venture, certainly one that we've been talking to, is half a gigaton by 2050. So if we are able to, reach the 10 million and then double it, we will be able to get that there. So we're working on a path. Yeah, so it's 10 million in perpetuity for a startup with longevity, a company with longevity. Another reflection just before I move on to this is what you said about breaking down capitalism. We just don't have time, right, to break things down. We have to just work with the systems we're in and try to do our best. And this is what entrepreneurship is all about, I believe. So my background on why I applied, well, I have always really been an entrepreneur. The first business that I ran in this country was in 2008. So my story goes back to 2008 to 2015. I'm originally from Mexico, and I was just frankly fed up with the bad quality of Mexican food in the UK. So I started with my kitchen, making some salsas, and it just grew from there, going to supermarkets and having wide distribution in food service as well. And but within that, I was always looking for what I didn't know at the time, but I was looking for regenerative agriculture. I was looking to engage with those growers that were doing those ancient maize strains and all those kind of things. I did that in a moderately successful way, not very. I would have liked to have scaled it further. But in 2015, for a variety of reasons, decided to exit. And I decided to then join corporates for which sustainability was an important part of the rest on the outro. Sorry about the French. The reason of being. And so I joined Unilever in a commercial role, but also in a sustainability role. And then I wanted to learn about the meat-free and all that kind of movement that was growing. So then after 2.5 years, I moved to Quorn. Again, a commercial and sustainability role. Quorn is a vegetarian, vegan, meat-free protein. For those who few who don't know it. And then I wanted to explore the farmer ownership model of a business model. So when the opportunity came to join Divine, I ran their commercial team there, and it was a very interesting thing to join, to see how a business like that was from the inside, what it was like to have growers as part of your share structure. But all that time I was trying to garner some new tools to be able to become an entrepreneur again. So in 2019, I decided to go back to school and started a master's in sustainability. And I always knew that I wanted to equip myself to get more information to have a well-informed startup. And then when the time came to choose a supervisor, I came across Chris's background, and I was fascinated. So we struck a conversation, and then another one, and so on. And so over the months, we talked a number of times, and he mentioned about Carbon 13. So when it opened, I actually applied. I was the first person ever to apply to Carbon 13, I believe. And then I joined in March, and I came in with some ideas of what I wanted to do. I wanted to bring my food industry background, and knowing that the food industry is really quite broken, and you know, a cause for 30% of annual greenhouse gases, and you know, driver of deforestation. And so that actually kind of quite hurt me in the fact that it's something that should be a problem, it was so it should be a solution, it was such a problem. So I wanted to devise a solution. So in a process of moving on to the teaming sort of side of things. So that's the second question. Or shall we pause for any questions now, or shall we move on to the second?
I suggest, Marcela, you're on a very good run right now. The flow is great. Just keep going, and we're going to open the floor to questions for you and Chris just after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So so we had a bit of a mixture of, obviously we were all on Zoom, so we had a bit of a mixture of trying, you know, everyone trying to make it interactive and so on, but I couldn't just help that was it a bit of a swipe left or swipe right kind of exercise, right? It's a bit of I don't know if you've heard, if you've ever watched a program called Love Island. So that was discussed as well a bit, getting to know different people in different ways. But I think Zoom can also enable in a different way than in person. I mean, I'm very jealous of the face-to-face people for cohort 2, but I think that is not all bad for Zoom, and we made it work. Very early on, I met Angela, very early on, I think on my first or second day, and we struck a really good relationship from the start. It was very easy to talk, and we had a lot of things in common. And then I came to Chris with a couple of ideas, and he kind of said that he was shocked they were so bad. And, but it's great to, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, you have to have a thick skin and, you know, listen, but also understand when you need to be a bit stubborn as well, I guess. So fine line. But the other thing that was, Angela and I thought that we were a little bit too similar, that both of us, we're not scientists, for example, and so we were wondering whether that would be a good fit. But we could not avoid the fact that we had a lot of things in common. I mean, a deep love for nature, and we both wanted to use nature-based solutions as our vehicle. And so we started to work on an idea, but she also had someone else that she was looking into teaming, and I also had someone else that I was looking into teaming, and so on. But it was kind of quite a pool, really. So it worked very well. Although our skills are not as complementary as textbook would advise, our actual way of thinking is very different. So I think that is also a nuance that perhaps we didn't get so much, so that was an interesting insight there. So we teamed, and we have since pivoted to a slightly different idea. But we're very excited with what we're building, which is around using agroecology, agroforestry to try and fix the Maya rainforest. So using underutilized plants that are native from that area in Central America, and use them as a vehicle to find a meaningful way for people to make it worthwhile. They're having the trees standing rather than chopping them down, quite simply. But there is a lot of degraded land there. So we are creating very good partnerships. We are gaining a lot of momentum with NGOs and partnerships, but also testing our concept with real customers. So sending them samples and understanding which one they prefer and so on. So kind of they're helping us devise our beta products. Something that they really liked was the fact that we could offer an LCA, life cycle assessment, which is a very thorough and shall I say, doesn't play to my strengths. Angela did most of it. I did work on it as well. But so it measures why an ingredient is carbon negative, why an ingredient absorbs carbon. And so we are talking to corporates who have said, well, we're going to hit a net zero target, but truly don't know how to reach that. And they have told us that our solution is part of something that they want to integrate. So last time when I was an entrepreneur selling individual things, I realized that it is difficult and slow to scale. This time, if we integrate ourselves from B2B from day one, we can hit scale much more quickly. So that's where we're up to. We are also going to do some interesting things to land, to the soils, biochar, and we're also researching other interesting methods to enhance carbon capture. So right now, that's what we're doing. We're testing our product. We're testing different ways to capture more carbon, talking to lots of scientists, talking to lots of customers, lots of partnerships forming with NGOs, and a lot of support from Carbon 13 as well. So it's been really useful to have their back, really. I'm not saying this because Chris is here, but that's how we have felt very, very supported. And with regards to investors, we are going well. Our proposition is not fully there yet in terms of talking about numbers, etc. But we have a number of people interested. So that's where we're at.
Well, that sounds really exciting, Marcela. And you say you're a bit jealous of Cohort 2 because of the face-to-face, but I'm a bit jealous of you having passed this first phase and formed the team, because right now everybody here is teaming, as it's a verb. We learned that, right? Teaming is a verb. It's very important at Carbon 13.
Yeah,
a lot of action linked with that. And there are so many opportunities in catching up and meeting great people that the program has selected, that this time of finding who to form a team with is actually a nice problem to have. It's because the quality of the people recruited is quite exceptional. So yeah, thank you very much, Marcela, Chris. I think I'd like to open basically the mic to the audience and just say, anybody with a question, we're not too now. I would suggest that you just start speaking and see if you have a question, we can address it. You can say to who it is if you want everybody to address it, or if it's to anybody, myself, Marcela, or Chris, more specifically.
Hello.
Hello.
Nicholas, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
This is a question really, I think, for Chris Coleridge. My name's Christopher Seeger. I did history at Cambridge, actually, but I spent a lot of time in the diplomatic service, and I did a lot of work on energy. I worked at the International Energy Agency in Paris from 2008 to 2015, and we did a lot of work on climate change, obviously. I can remember about 20 years ago when I was head of energy department in the Foreign Office, it was either Shell or BP who came to see me, and they said, we don't mind what regulations governments make to tackle climate change. Just tell us what the rules are, and we will play the game because we know how to play the game and we know how to win. And since then, in the last 20 years, I think one of the main problems has been governments have not come up with a firm set of rules to tackle climate change. My question for Chris Coleridge is, does he see the list of the collection of nationally determined contributions set up by the Paris Climate Accord as adequate to tackling climate change and reducing global warming to 1.5 degrees? And secondly, does it give him, as the sponsor of entrepreneurs, enough insight into where the opportunities in the market are going to be and target the entrepreneurs in that direction?
Chris, I think someone asked if Chris was still here, and I've been going through the different names. I think Chris has been disconnected.
Oh.
Can you confirm, Tony? I don't see him.
No.
Oh.
Yes, he's just coming back in again now.
Okay. Very sorry, Christopher. You may, if I may repeat your question, may as you said to him that it's you're asking if the NDCs are sufficient as currently laid out, and whether that provide sufficient insight for entrepreneurs. Is that correct, Christopher?
That's a very good summary. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'm afraid we've been disconnected for a second, so you may not have heard the question Christopher just asked. He was wondering if you could share your views on whether the NDCs currently being submitted following the Paris Agreement seems enough to you. Are they ambitious enough? And the second question would be whether this leads to insights that maybe will help guide the cohorts moving forward.
I suppose where we tend to look for insights is where do we tend? You know as well as I do where we look for insights, Nicholas. We're very founder driven. And so that means that we are not providing some kind of overarching framework that we say, please fit into this. The closest we come is to nudge people in the direction of drawdown.org. You may be familiar with their work, which they're an independent now, but they started at the University of Michigan. And I've seen a few other. I mean, in a way, the NDCs are telling us what's already baked in and known. And we're looking at the white space. I mean, that's slightly oversimplifying. I'm sure they're not ambitious enough. Well, I mean, no, that's not true. They may or may not be ambitious enough. They won't be implemented in the form that that is implied by the plans. So it's sort of slightly a moot point. I mean, I think of this flattening the curve metaphor that we got at the beginning of the pandemic sometimes seems like the right one. I understand the rhetorical game that those who are talking about 1.5 degrees of global heating are playing, but the latest figure that I saw a few weeks ago that seems to have some credence is we're sort of 2.7 degrees is sort of almost certain. Or is quite is a central tendency of a nice fan of probabilities, and so we've really got to be in the sort of mitigation mode. So in a sense, we need massive changes that are very difficult to see the shape of in lots of sectors of the economy that otherwise won't change in the way that the NDCs suggest. I feel that's a slightly blathery answer, but that's my answer, Christopher. Thank you for the question.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you.
May I ask a question? As a musician, of course, I have no credentials to speak with any authority on this. But it does seem to me that it's rather like mending the china on the Titanic. The question of how to adapt entrepreneurship. And I was just wondering whether I'm the only one with thinking that, because I think that we need to stop the car and throw the keys out of the window. I think we need a far more drastic change. And of course, when you listen to Greta, she's very annoying, but I think that she's right on the ball. And I wonder what you thought.
Well, thank you for putting, I mean, I prefer light a candle as the metaphor to mending the, but I do half agree, I do half agree with you that my activities and those of my colleagues may be totally pointless, and that we may be quite, we may see the level of societal disruption that we may have sort of locked into the system may mean that any thought of sort of changing, if I say, oh, well, we want consumers to consume less material stuff and have more intangible sort of, we may be looking at a system where we may be looking at a situation where the food system has entirely broken down. So to talk about, well, let's get consumers on experiences rather, we've got one of our ventures that we're perfectly happy with in terms of the goals we've set ourselves is buying what would otherwise be considered to be end-of-life wind turbines and giving them an extra 10 years of life. Now that's a very worthy thing to, I mean, this is both a worthy and a sort of worthwhile thing to do, if you like. But, if I say that, we might look at that and say, well, that activity in itself is never going to rise to the level of a sort of the kind of systemic change that is needed. I just, if I knew how to get us to throw the keys out the window, I would be more, I'd be in sympathy with this, but I'm not sure Extinction Rebellion or any analog to Extinction Rebellion is the way to throw the keys out of the window. So I don't know. I
wasn't actually thinking of Extinction Rebellion. I was thinking of changing. I was thinking of changing ourselves. We are consumers, and we've been batting on about consumers for about the last 50 years. We no longer make things, and I was thinking that we need to change man and woman to from consumers to makers, to get back to the original Homo faber. And I think that if we think of that, then we're thinking of a profound change, which we need a debate about. There is no debate about it. And I think we need to one of the things that most interests me is repairing things, repairing humans, repairing relations, repairing music, repairing things, I think. And I was just wondering if I'm the only one. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I was just wondering if there were other voices who were sympathetic with that.
I'll have a stab. I mean, I do. The idea of changing man and changing, So if I say something pessimistic first and then something bit less pessimistic, every time I think about changing, are we collectively capable of the change that is needed? I think about Christmas, because not every, but most of the even the greenest people that I know make an exception for Christmas and say, well, You know, I don't want to put myself so far outside the pale of society that I won't indulge and travel and, you know, do and fall in with the norms of the rest of my family at Christmas. So I sort of get a bit despairing about our ability to take on board even a minimal level of change, let alone the kind of transformation that you're talking about. But where I think you and I might be in more harmony is, and I agree with you that there must be others who think as you do, is that if we're going to solve this problem, we're fundamentally going to change the nature of the way we house each other. We're fundamentally going to change the nature of the way we get, how much and on what basis we travel. We're fundamentally going to change the nature of what we eat and buy and, you know, engage with. So somewhere along the way, we will find some you know, unless there's a total breakdown and we're sort of trying to rebuild from scratch, we will find some new set of accommodations that might not be a million miles away from what you visualize. You know, that might have a lot of characteristics that that you've thought on in what you're saying. The entrepreneurship approach is saying, well, we won't get there by having a sort of totalizing vision of how we should live and trying to sell our fellow creatures on it. We'll get there by launching tens of thousands of small boats, if you like, and some of those boats will end up being the seeds of bigger change, but we can't see ex ante what those are.
It seems to me that we are between two situations. The first situation is we don't do anything and we're obliged to do something in panic. The second situation is that we take the panic on board before it gets us.
Yeah.
And we get ahead of it. That is not something we're going to do democratically. People will, as you say, want their cars. People will want their Christmas. People will want everything else that they're accustomed to. They will want their level of electricity. They cannot have it.
Mm.
And what are we going to do about it? This is my question.
So can I contribute? I think that we cannot do this alone. Entrepreneurship is one answer, but what you're talking about is legislation. And, you know, we have very short-termist government structures. Nobody is going to get elected if they say, you know, vote for me and I'm going to abolish consumerism. So, you know, unfortunately, we have proved during COVID-19 that if we feel that there's the urgency and the need, that we're going to stay at home, we're not going to travel, we're going to change our lives. But for a lot of people, it doesn't seem that this climate emergency is that situation. And that is more of a role of governments to install entrepreneurship. We try to do something, but we are playing in the system of profit. And so without profits, we cannot operate. And so there's maybe a flaw in there.
And I would like to complement this also. Sorry, just a quick one, just saying that, you know, when you deal with a situation, when you want to provide some, in any relationship, in any circumstances, you want to provide constructive criticism. One of the ways to do that is by saying that there are alternatives that you can offer on the table. And entrepreneurship is the creation of those alternatives, because saying that things don't work, you may have lots of proof of it, but without bringing alternatives, you don't lead the debate much further. So I think there's room for entrepreneurship to be an accelerator, a huge catalyst for change. But clearly, I fully agree that this is only a small part of the jigsaw.
Nicholas, I wasn't actually saying or suggesting that entrepreneurship doesn't work. I was saying that our priorities aren't in the right place. And I was thinking that entrepreneurship might be a way of going forward.
Just think we've only got 3 minutes left. So Peter, you've had a nice good turn.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Now, I'd like to just jump on Chris's comment that there's engineers and there was a social side of it. one thing I saw today, which really shocked me, in the talk about the current problem about the increase of gas and electricity costs, they interviewed a householder who said, if I have to put a cardigan on in the house, things are wrong. I should be able to heat my house to the temperature I want and basically go around naked if I like. We need to change people's attitudes. So to what extent, when you're selecting your cohorts, are you mixing the technology and the social education so that you get both aspects of it?
Well, thank you, and I agree that is a shocking note. The education in large part comes from them meeting each other and sort of, you know, I get frustrated at the pace sometimes because despite our efforts, which are considerable, there's still quite a bit of homophily and people, birds of a feather flocking together. But that's life, you know. They hear each other's perspective from each other, and we do a lot of sort of semi-forced mixing to get that going. But as you say, you know, there's even within our group where we try to be very clear-eyed in the way I've described this evening. There are people who are quite, you know, quite bullish, right, and say we're going to make it all come right, you know, through the, you know, by forcing these corporates to reform their processes and so on, and it just, well, anyway, it's a good question. It's a good question, Tony. Thank you. And as I sort of started to say, but perhaps didn't articulate very well, the advent of cohort 2 has really seen some of this mixing come into a better light, because I think a good portion of cohort 1 can see the benefits of eventually there's going to be 1,000 people who've been through our program within a few years, and cohort 2 can certainly see the benefits of, we can learn the lessons more quickly from those who've come before, and so there's a sort of, you know, they're reaching out to each other in ways that you know, I'd hoped for and are happening. So, you know, as the critical mass increases, some of the flows of this kind of education that you're talking about will also increase.
Thank you very much, Chris, Marcella. I think we're getting to the end.
I have to run away. Thank you so much.
You have a nice evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Nicola, I wanted to ask you,
yes.
How are you supposed to trust somebody that you've just met to build a startup? Because there's the team building part of
so program. That's exactly the phase we are in. Okay, the first 6 weeks of the program is, I'm happy to stay a bit longer, by the way. So if anybody has more questions, I don't know, Marcella, I think Marcella has left, but I'm available for you guys. So the first 6 weeks is about meeting the people here. And we go through a lot of time together, exercises, exploration of our personality expectations in terms of the kind of relationship and the kind of working habits, etc., that are important. Within 6 weeks, you don't have a risk-free proposition to make. So you follow your guts in terms of the kind of people that are on paper extremely complementary to you, and also you get on with it. Okay, what Carbon 13 has created is the ability to meet in a very short time an amazing group of diverse people that can go from CFO to CTO or to COO to CFO. All those people are present. And so with those experience skill sets, you know, there are lots of different combinations, and everybody here has the same values. We all believe in sustainability. It's a proven fact. We have runways. We don't have to work in the next 3 months. We have the ability to cope with the hardship of the start of the startup. So everybody is ready. I've been looking for this kind of option for a long time. I can guarantee you that there's no better place than here. 50 of those people in one place for 6 weeks. It's amazing. Sorry, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
What's the average age of the cohort? Are there?
It goes from 21 to 63, so
okay.
65. Average age is probably around my age, 38, 39.
Okay, thank you.
But by all means, by the way, if you are interested or anybody is interested, there will be a cohort 3, a cohort 4. If you want to have more questions, to have more discussion with me or Marcella or Chris, please get in touch. Very happy to explain and share more with all of you. I'm the one interested in business.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice evening. Stephanie, did you want to say something?
No, I was just saying that I think the whole Carbon13 project, I absolutely love it. I think it's a really great initiative because some of the challenges that people face, especially entrepreneurs, really struggle with trying to find, they don't want to go it alone. So they're really trying to find other people. And there's so many entrepreneurs that are starting things that, and when I guess it was trying to invest in something that's at scale. And I see, there's so many entrepreneurs out there that are trying to do the right thing, trying to start up, but it's just, they're never going to make any money because it's really the wrong business, but they're still trying. So yeah. I think that everything that they brought together with Carbon13 is really, it's really nice. It's nice to see. And I really hope that everything goes well for you as well as Carbon13.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you. Okay, if there are no other burning questions, I wish you all an excellent evening and feel free to get in touch anytime.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.